the main thing is just kind of chat with John here.
Yeah, you and I are just chatting. So tell me who you are and all about you.
Hi, John. I'm Don Whipple, and I was raised out in western Kansas on a farm. Came from a large family and milked a lot of cows and that kind of a thing. Lived in a little town. I went to school in a little town called Beeler, Kansas, about 40 miles north of Dodge City. I always tell people when they ask me where I'm from, I say Dodge City because nobody knows where Beeler's from, and most of them know where Dodge City is. So I went through high school and remember seeing in Life magazine a picture of the Marines landing on Tulagi down at Guadalcanal area. And I remember seeing that picture and I thought, well, you know, that's where I ought to join up with the Marine Corps. So when I got out of high school, I came to Denver to enlist in the Marines, and they signed me all up, but I couldn't get in because I had to have my parents' permission. So I got on the train, went back to Kansas again, and got my parents' permission and came back out, as I was only 17 at the time. So I stayed back and helped in the harvest time during that summer, and they didn't call me up until about September 1943. And I took the train back out to California, and remember landing at San Diego there, Los Angeles, in the train station there. And there's a whole group of Marines out there on the front lawn with their rifles stacked. That's when they stack them up like a pyramid, you know, or like a tripod. And they were just laying around up there, just getting ready to be shipped out somewhere. And they said, "Where are you going?" I says, "Down to San Diego to the Marine Depot, Marine Recruit Depot." And they said, "You'll be sorry." And that little phrase followed me everywhere I went down there. When we get down there and you'd be walking across the way to our bungalow where we stayed there in boot camp, somebody would pass you and say, "You'll be sorry," because they could see I just had a fresh haircut and that I was a incoming boot. And went through boot camp, and there was times that I was sorry. Because Marine Corps boot camp is what it's always said of it to be. And those drill instructors, they keep on you. Get you out in the middle of the night and stuff like that, and you have to get dressed in the dark and just things to. And it's a good brainwashing technique, is what it is, in my opinion. But it was helpful because you had a break from your old way of doing things, and they were able to take and mold you into something new. And all of us were just teenagers, so it was pretty easy to impact us. Well, out of boot camp, I was transferred to a communication school, a radio telephone school, and took training to be stringing wire and wiring up complex circuits and things like that, climbing poles and getting burned a few times by trying to react naturally, as everybody does. When you feel like you get up there a ways, you get kind of shaky and you start leaning against that pole, and that's where you pull your spikes right out of the pole and you go burning down. And that's a sensation, I'll tell you. But anyway, after that, we were transferred to Camp Pendleton out of San Diego. It's our camp outside of Oceanside, California. And there in Camp Pendleton, we were part of the 5th Marine Division as it was just being formed. So there weren't very many people in the division as yet. So I was in those very beginning days. So I got to see most of the guys that came in. And we began training after we got enough guys to kind of get the division formed. Up until then, we were just kind of assembling gear and things like that. So when we got into our training, we were attached to an artillery battalion, and I was on a forward observer team, the communications guy on a forward observer team. There'd be a scout sergeant and an observation officer and a radio man and a telephone man. And so we would go out and find a high ground somewhere and have the artillery they would fire way back, a few miles back. They would fire around and on some point that we would have on our map that they would be familiar with, we'd be familiar with. And then we would tell them how close they were coming to this point, whether it was an old farmhouse or whatever it was that we used for a tree or whatever it was we were using, what we call a base point. And so they'd fire this round and we'd tell them left 2 millimeters and up 1 millimeter, and do that until we landed on that target, and that was our base point. And everything else happened from there. And so if we were in combat somewhere, that's what we would do. We'd establish a base point, and then if there's a pillbox somewhere in the area that we need to have knocked out, we would direct them where to go from that base point. And that's how we would level in on it, and then we would tell them then that they'd fire around. We'd tell them either to come to the right a little bit or the range need to be corrected, and have them be able to adjust to fit that on that, to hit that pillbox from that kind of a arrangement. And so our job was to get the telephone line strung up there, and when the enemy cut the lines, we had to go back and find the place where it was cut and be watching out for them, because they were waiting for us to come. They knew we'd be coming, and we were the message that was going back, and we were the ones that were telling them where to shoot at them, and they wanted to get rid of us. So they would oftentimes cut the telephone line just so they could get somebody to come back and fix it so they could get rid of us. And so that was kind of the job that I had there in the Marine Corps. We worked there in San Diego for probably as long as anybody trained for any one mission. We had a long time to train. And we would go make landings, go out in the ocean on an amphibious ship and come in and get in those little VC vehicle troop Higgins boats with the ramp falls down in front. And we'd make a landing, and if we got wet, we would just wade back out and get in that boat again and go back out and make another landing. Do that day in and day out for weeks and months. And various kinds of things. We'd come in on rubber boats. We'd come in on LSIs and LSTs, rather, and infantry boats, LCIs. That's not the name of it. Anyway, it's an infantry landing boat. And so we'd do that all day long, just make landings so that we could know how to come down off of that landing net off the side of a ship. And we'd have about 70 pounds of gear on us, and so we had to get used to what we were doing in that. After a while, in the following year, 1944, we were moved to Hawaii, to the Big Island, Hawaii, to the area up in Hawaii where the Parker Ranch is located. And being a farmer and a fellow that was raised on a cattle ranch, that amazed me to see the second largest ranch in the world there in Hawaii. And these guys would have rodeos and round up cattle and brand them and all the rest, just like we did. And so we trained there in that volcanic ash there in Hawaii for several months. And never knew any idea, had no idea. We had a lot of rumors where we would go. Some said, well, you go to Truk, and some said, well, Peleliu, and others to Formosa, and all kinds of rumors where we were going. Because rumors fly fast. And we had a map, though, that we would be working from, and it was kind of a little triangular-shaped island that we were working from. And just before we got ready to ship out for the landing on Iwo Jima, why we stopped in Honolulu, and we saw the newspaper where the bombers had bombed an island out in the Pacific there, about halfway between Tinian and Tokyo. And the island they were bombing was just like the map we'd been working from all the time. So we knew then that was the place where we were going to go, or we were pretty sure of that. And then Tokyo Rose, she was an American lady that had gone to Japan. I think she's from Japanese descent, but she had gone over to Japan to work or get schooling or something. And the war came on at that time, and whether they wouldn't let her go or what, I don't know. But anyway, she became known as Tokyo Rose, and she'd make broadcasts and try to tear down the morale of the American service people and also their folks, their families. And Tokyo Rose, she said, well, today the 3rd, 4th, and 5th Marine Divisions have just shipped out of Honolulu towards Iwo Jima. And they knew all about where we were going. And she said this 5th Division was so bad in California that they had to get them out of there because they were like a bunch of animals. They'd just tear up everything. And she had all kinds of nasty things to say about us. I got a recording of her speaking. She had all the information and telling about how we'd never get back off of that place. So as we got to see, then the various commanders would call all of us together in our units where we were, and they had a relief map, and there we kind of studied where we were going and what beaches we were on to land on, and they had the beaches colored, and the color, they call them yellow beach, green beach, red beach, various colors. And so they had the different beaches, and then you would begin to know what beach you were going to be assigned on. And the guys that landed us, they were the ones that had to find out where the beaches were, and because we had no idea. We just knew we were to be on a green beach. So as we got there to Tinian, we made some shuffling of some troops and some different ships. And there's a huge armada of battleships, aircraft carriers, destroyers, cruisers, every conceivable kind of ship was there. As far as you could see was ships and troop ships. And so we went the next day we left for Iwo, which is about 750 miles on up north of Tinian and Guam in that area. And got in there, and it was dark when we pulled in there, and the next morning was D-Day, and so we were all kind of anticipating what was coming on. And as we went to bed that night, we were informed that we had to be all dressed with clean pressed dungarees to land, and that used to puzzle us. Think, man, why in the world would you want to have clean pressed dungarees to make this landing? But it made sense because if you got wounded, it was less chance for infection and things like that. And so they fed us a holiday type meal for breakfast. That was the last meal many was going to eat. And so they, kind of like a man condemned to death, they give him his last meal, a good meal. And this one was kind of a Christmas menu. It had turkey and dressing and pumpkin pie and everything else you'd have at a Christmas dinner for breakfast. And so we got up to eat it seems to me about 3:30 in the morning we were raised to eat. And while we were waiting around there for eat a little while, we went up on deck, and there you could see the ships banging away at the island with them. Battleships firing their big guns, and destroyers and cruisers were all everywhere. It just lit the place up, and the sound was horrendous. And as dawn began to come about, why, we could see that island kind of take shape, and it looked like some huge monster raising up out of the sea with Mount Suribachi is the head of that thing. And then the bombers came in, and the Navy planes came in, and just strike after strike would come in and blast away at that island. And that went on till about 5 minutes till 9. And in the meanwhile, we had our breakfast, and we got our gear on and went over to the side of the ship and lined up to load up. And as we went down this rope landing net, why the sea was pretty rough. And that little old LCVP boat would raise and lower about 10 or 12 feet every time a wave would come on. And so as you're going on that landing net, you had to be kind of keeping your eyes open because you had a lot of weight on your back, and about 70 pounds, I think it was, and your rifle and all the rest of the stuff. As we'd go down, that boat would rise up as the sea raised up, and it could meet you faster than you thought it was going to meet you, or else it would drop, and you'd have another 10 feet to go. So you had to keep pretty alert to getting down there. And if you tarried long, there'd be other guys right behind you stepping on your fingers if you didn't get off that next rope that you were hanging on to. So we landed, and then we took off away from the old troop ship a little ways and kind of formed a circle out there and kind of rendezvoused there for a little while till all the ships and all the boats got loaded for our particular wave. And then we'd gone out closer to the beach and again have another rendezvous area where the boats would circle till our wave got ready to go in. And we were all curious, of course, a bunch of teenage kids, and we wanted to stand up there and see what was happening. And it just seemed like another practice session to me, another landing, another mock landing that we'd made so many of them. And it was hard to realize this was for real. What really made that real to me was I heard this Navy fighter plane making some funny sounds, and I looked up there, and there I saw that fighter plane come spiraling down. It had been hit from the ground fire on the island, and it splashed into the sea, and I thought, man, this is a real thing. And then as we had our order to go in and get to be the next wave, I went on the second or third wave or so, I don't know just which one or how it was, but we got up there and we all got in a straight line and started for the beach. And when we were going in, well, I saw a boat just to the right of me get hit with some artillery from the island, because they had all these places focused in, and when the boat got to that area, well, they just knew where it was at. It was all lined in. And hit that boat, and I saw that boat explode and go up in the air, and arms and legs and bodies and everything was flying everywhere. And I thought, man, this is for real. You knew it was, but this is consciously you begin to get the idea that this is not just a mock landing. This is for life or death. And we hit the beach, got a nice dry landing right up on the beach, and the waves were pretty good, and also the beach had a big slant to it. And we hit that beach, and it was nothing but black ash. When you think of a beach, you think of white sand, but this is just black ash and smelled like sulfur, because these were volcanic islands. And you try to walk in that stuff, and you'd sink in clear about to your knees, it seems like, and it was soft. And we were pulling a little machine gun cart. It had wheels about the size of an old Model A Ford wheel, 19-inch or so, I think. And it was just a little square metal box of about probably 3 foot long and maybe 2 foot wide, and about probably 2 to 3 feet deep. And in this little cart was where we carried our telephones and our radios and wire and stuff like that. So we had to pull that thing through this stuff, and it was sinking way down in the ground into that sand as well, or that ash. So we got to the beach and flattened out about as flat as we could get. And there were some huge kind of layers of levels. And you go up about 20 feet. It was pretty good slant up there. And then it would level off, and terraces, what they would be like. And made that way from the waves coming in over the time, I guess, because interestingly enough, I was at a briefing session for the Marine Corps. Sent some guys out for a briefing during the first venture into Kuwait there, back a number of years ago. And one of these fellows from Washington said that Iwo Jima is now 26 feet higher out of the ocean than it was back when we landed there. And so I guess it washed away there, and it's all the time moving as a volcano. And so finally our captain said, well, let's move out, guys. And so we got up, got a hold of our cart, and it had a T tongue on it where 2 guys would get on the tongue. 2 guys were pushing from the back, and then 2 of us were on the front on long ropes that were tied onto the front of the box of this little cart. And we were out in the front leading this thing, pulling out there on the side as well. And so just as we moved up over this first ridge, that first terrace, a mortar, it went off and knocked us down. And I started to get up and fell down again. My old captain says, "You've been hit, Whip." And I looked, and there was blood on my leg. And So he helped me hobble over to a big old shell hole made there by the battleships. And he rolled me down that hole and covered me up with sand and said, "I'll get a corpsman." And wasn't long till another guy from our outfit came up, had been glazed in the back. And he had him helping him down. And all the while, I don't know how he made it, because all the while we could see tracers, machine guns going over our head, tracer bullets. And just a red, like a red light, so that they could see where they was good with these tracer bullets. And I don't know how he could get around out there without getting shot, but he was a great man, gutsy guy, but he watched out for us at the expense of his own life many times. So we were there for a little while, and the corpsman came and took us down to an aid station on some stretchers, and we were at the aid station just a little while till they kind of got things sorted out, and then they moved us down to the beach and they put us on a ship, another landing boat to take us out to this ship. And there was probably 50 or 60 of us on that large tank landing craft, mechanized landing. And we went out, and there was an air raid about that time of Japanese airplanes came in, and so they put up a smoke screen, and it was getting dark, and that day moved so fast. I don't know what all happened that day, because it just seemed like no time. It was that evening, and it was dark, and you didn't know what was happening or what was going on next, so you just kind of just rode with the things that went along. We got out there, and it was getting dark, and we'd pull up beside one ship. These were Liberty ships have been changed into hospital ships. They'd been troop ships and changed into hospital ships. Pull up to this one ship, and the guy said, "We can't take you, we're full." So we'd go to another ship, and he'd say, "We can't take you, we're full." And finally he pulled up to another, and the Lieutenant JG or whatever he was that was hitting up on that landing craft, he hollers up and says, "I'm not moving. These guys, there's some five men here that are in desperate shape. You've got to take me in. I'm not going to move." They said, "We can't take you." He said, "I'm not going to move." And so finally they gave in and took us aboard. And I remember sitting beside a guy, or laying there beside a guy he was kind of setting up, leaning against the bulkhead, and I was too, and so I could look over at him, and here he had everything gone, from his face all down to his chest. And
You just ran across your microphone.
I'm
here,
sorry.
So let me reset my camera here, and then I think I'll have you talk about that again, because there was just too much noise on the microphone.
I was sitting next to this fellow on this boat, and we were kind of propped up against the side of the boat. And I looked over there, and he was trying to say something, and he was just kind of bubbling blowing bubbles with his whole chest being gone. I could see his heart and lungs and everything else there is exposed. I don't know how the man could have lived, but he sure needed to be taken aboard that boat, I know that. So we were taken aboard that boat, and I remember I had a bunk, this second bunk up. These Navy bunks are just kind of hinged. They're just kind of canvas things that are hinged, and they fold up so you can get in and around. And otherwise, they're about 8 or 10 high in some of those areas. But the guy directly underneath of me, I remember seeing him as I went to my bunk, and I saw his blanket laying there, and he was unconscious or asleep, I don't know what, but I could see the blanket covered his body till it got to the end of his body, and then it just went flat. So apparently he had both legs gone. Next morning he was gone, so apparently he died during the night. And so the next morning they put out a call over the loudspeaker system and said, "The smoking lamp is out." In other words, there's no smoking for right now. We're going to have some burials at sea. And so I could hobble around a bit, so I thought I'd just get up and go out and honor these guys. And there they had these guys lined up on racks covered with flags and had the bodies in kind of a wire basket. And they'd play taps, and then they would slide them off into the sea. And they had about 8 or 10 burials that first morning. At least it seems like that, something like that. And that happened every morning. We'd have burials at sea. And so we were on this boat for 3 days, and this ship was getting ready to move out to Guam to the hospital, to take guys to the hospital. And me and my friend that was from my outfit, we got together and we thought we don't want to go to Guam and be over there and no, it's more serious than we were hurt. I got hit in the flesh part of my thigh with shrapnel. And so I could get along. I really should have never even been evacuated, I guess, but my captain said, you're going to get evacuated, so you go. So anyway, we thought, well, we'd like to go back ashore. And we began to scout around and see what we could do, and we saw one of the drivers of one of these boats, a coxswain. We saw him getting ready to lower a boat down to the side, over the side. We went over and asked him if we could ride down with him, and we had on these Navy pajamas, and he said, you better get different clothes on than this. So we went over to a big pile of clothes. It was referred to as a dead men's pile because that's where they took the clothes and the gear, the packs, the blankets, the mess gear, the gas mask, your rifle, your ammunition, shoes, socks, everything. You had to find something. We found something in this pile. We put those on right quick and went over and climbed in this boat, and he lowered the boat down because we knew we couldn't go down that landing net because my leg was too stiff and his back was stiff and he couldn't do it. So we rode that boat down and he took us back ashore. I guess we're still AWOL according to that ship there. They're probably still wondering what happened to us, but we jumped ship and went back ashore. Some people say, well, you guys are really dumb or stupid. You had a ticket out of there and you went back ashore. But, you know, teenagers do funny things sometimes. And he took us right back to Green Beach where we'd landed. And we got on the beach and started moving in a little ways. And our outfit hadn't moved very much because some days we'd only gain inches. We wouldn't gain miles. You'd gain inches. That island was only 7 miles long and 5 miles wide at the widest place. So there was 20,000 Japanese at least, maybe more. We don't know how many exactly. And 3 divisions of Marines at 20,000 apiece, so that's 60,000. So 80,000 at least people on that little old island of 7 miles long. So we were right at the foot of Mount Suribachi. Green Beach was right at the foot of Mount Suribachi. And so being in communication, we kind of knew what was going on because we could hear them talking and on the phone and so our radio. And we knew they were getting ready to raise a flag up there. And so we were watching up there, so we got to see them raise the flag, and it just, bedlam broke out across that island. The battleships at sea started honking their horns and blowing their horns and shooting ammunition off, and guys were hollering and firing their rifles, and it was a real celebration time when that flag went up on Iwo Jima, on Mount Suribachi. We were there then for 33 more days, and first, I know, in the first 2 or 3 days, we didn't get any sleep at all the first 2 or 3 days, and we couldn't get around too well. So I worked in the communications center there, working at a switchboard to help direct calls to different units, and as the forward observers that were functioning would call back, then we would direct their call to the artillery or to the fire direction center that determined where they were to fire, how many bags of powder they were to put in and all that stuff. And then they would call to the artillery pieces that were going to fire the guns. And so I was there directing calls and that. You couldn't dig a hole. Our captain, we called him the old man. He was only 24 years old. But I remember one day, the reason I know he's that age, because we were digging foxholes together, trying to, but it's like digging in wheat. You dig in and the stuff grains running right behind you. And it was hot. And there was steam raising up off from that volcanic heat. At night when it would cool off more, why, that steam would condense and it'd be foggy, and the first foot or two would be foggy, really eerie. And also during the night, the island never got dark because the battleships would keep firing over flares, and they'd shoot them up in the air, and they'd go off up in the air, and then they would come down on parachutes, little parachutes, and that would light the island so we could watch for Japanese that were trying to sneak up into into our place. We had piano wire strung around us as well that they'd trip on, so it'd set off flares there, or grenades. And so that was the way the night was, and we would go through the night. If you had to go to the bathroom, you didn't get out of that hole, because Marines would shoot somebody they saw moving around at night, because they had no way of knowing just what or who it was. So we were there for 36 days all total on the island, but they anticipated it was only going to take us 4 days to take that island originally, so it was much longer than the 4 days, because that island was all honeycombed with caves, and the Japanese had all of their artillery pieces back in caves, and they were on railroad tracks, and they just scoot them up and fire and then back in so they couldn't destroy them. And they were bombed and pounded like no piece of real estate in World War II, I understand. It's the most heavily fortified place during the war. It was only 750 miles from Tokyo, and it was actually part of Tokyo. It was under the political system of Tokyo. And it was kind of the front guard of protection of Tokyo, and so they put everything in protecting that place. And this is also the first time the American flag had ever been raised on Japanese soil. The rest of the time we were just retaking places that they'd already taken. That's what I've read and understood. And the Japanese hadn't had a foreign troops on their soil since the 12th century before that, so they were pretty desperate to do this, and they had their best general out there running things, and he was trained here in America, had traveled throughout America, and he had great appreciation for Americans, and in some of his writings he told some of how he thought it was very foolish for us to go into war with America, because he traveled all over the United States and had friends in the military that he knew and whatnot. So when we got ready to get off the island by the last day, by the day before we were actually to leave, we were able to go out on our ships and take a first time and have a fresh shower. A shower and some regular cooked food. Up until that time, we were just eating K rations and C rations, and just K rations were in a little box about the size of a Cracker Jack box, and so it was neat to get a genuine hot meal, take a shower. But we also turned in our ammunition while we were out there, and we still had our rifles, but no ammunition. So we came back ashore again to pick up our equipment. And while we were ashore, we stayed all night that night, and there was a Japanese banzai attack that night. The banzai where they would come out with suicide attacks. And they had an attack that night, and there was some airplane guys, B-29 guys had landed there, and some fighter pilot guys had landed there on the island. We'd liberated the Strip and taken that. And they landed there on this island. They had their crews there and so forth, and they were living in tents. And these Japanese came and bayoneted a bunch of them through their tents and whatnot. And them and the Seabees kind of took the blunt of that banzai attack. And they lost several people. But boy, it was spooky for us because we had no ammunition, and we kept thinking, man, we've been here for 36 days and made it through now. Don't let us get bumped off the last day. But we made it off and got back ashore and got to the ship and shoved off back for Honolulu again, or for Hawaii. And arrived in Hawaii the day President Roosevelt died. The boy on the pier was going up and down selling papers and said, read all about it, read all about it. President died, President Roosevelt. And so I remember that was the day we landed back in Hawaii. There we began to train again after we kind of got regrouped and our units supplied with people. We had some units had 175% casualties. As they would get new replacements in, they'd get knocked off too, and so we had a lot of casualties. I think the first day there's about 2,000 killed, 2,000 Marines killed. A total of 6,000 something were killed all total, I think, and I can't recall the number that were wounded and other casualties. So we had a lot of rebuilding to do, and later on that fall, why we were assigned to go to Japan, to invade Japan. So we were all combat loaded with ready to go to invade Japan, and they dropped the atomic bomb in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, in these two cities. And so we were on the high seas when they signed the peace agreement, the armistice type thing. And out there on the high seas, the thing I really remember, after we were out there at sea for a while, you could see ships as far as you could see. We were assigned to the 10th Army at that time under General Douglas MacArthur. And as far as you could see was ships. And so we had blackouts, of course. But after the peace was signed, the lights came on. After a while, they permitted the ships to turn on their lights. And that was, remember a song at that time, I remember it was, "When the lights come on again all over the world." And I thought, that's the most thrilling thing in the world, see these lights shining again. So we landed at Sasebo, Japan, and there we were put up into some aircraft hangars, some seaplane hangars. And we were there for a few days, going into caves and that they were using for storage for radios and telescopes and cameras and all kinds of stuff like that, brand new stuff, and weapons and so forth. And we would go in and take these out and burn them. And one night, I remember we were out in the middle of a street burning this stuff, and first the kids would come out, the little kids would come out, and we were sitting there, and then pretty quick the women would come out, and then after that the men would come out. And I remember one night we were sitting there and we had little kids sitting on our lap, and we were singing Japanese folk songs, and they were wanting to know some American folk songs, and we were singing around that fire, like a big campfire. They then deactivated our division. In other words, they were no longer needed it, so they began to send us into other places. And so I was sent to the 2nd Division over in Nagasaki. And we were billeted there in a former kamikaze base. And before it was a kamikaze base, it was a leprosarium. And I can remember as we were having free time, and also when we would on duty sometimes, we had a little observation plane out there right in the very heart of Nagasaki, right in the epicenter of where the bomb went off. And we'd have to stand guard duty around that little observation plane and walk around there kicking up the dust. When that thing would rev up, it would blow dust everywhere. And nobody seemed to have any concern about radioactivity. I'd never heard a thing much about that. So I was more concerned about getting leprosy than I was getting bothered with radioactivity. I thought, man, there'd be leprosy germs in the woodwork and everything else, you know. Crazy young teenager I did. So finally I had enough points to go home, and you went home according to your points, how much you were in. If you had a Purple Heart, you got extra points, and I had received a Purple Heart, so I thought, man, that old Purple Heart's worth something. It's going to get me home a little sooner. So we got on this ship to go home and got out in the ocean a ways, and the bearing went out of the screw, the shaft where the screw propels the ship. And it would just vibrate and shake. So we couldn't go only about 10 knots an hour, and it would just start shaking like crazy if it went faster than that. And so it seemed like it took us forever to go home. I was eager to get home, and it just seemed like we were never going to get there. When we got into San Diego, however, it was a real warm welcome received. They had airplanes flying over in formation. They had fire boats out there spraying the sprays of fire up. And then we got and actually pulled up to the pier, while the Navy mothers were serving milk and cookies. And man, we hadn't had fresh milk for a long time, and everybody was so eager, and that was such a delight. Get off of that ship and be on American soil again. During the time before I went overseas, my father had been killed in a car accident. He had a blowout on his tire with tire rationing, and he was changing the tire, and a fellow had been drinking some, came in and got too close to him, went by and hooked him with his bumper and dragged him a while, and he didn't live only a few hours. But I didn't know anything about it till he was buried and dead and buried 6 weeks before I could find out about it. They couldn't see me how they didn't catch up with me. I was in Hawaii. My old captain, he tried every way in the world to see that he could make a way for me to get to go back, but we were too close to getting ready to leave for Evo. So I remember coming into Dodge City on that train, and I was so eager, I started getting ready way out here in La Junta, and there's going to be several hours yet before we got there. But got into Dodge City, and there I saw my mom and some of my little brothers and a couple sisters and my girlfriend. They were standing there waiting to meet me. And I jumped off that train, but it was kind of a strange feeling because I was looking for my dad, and yet I knew he was dead, but he just this wasn't right. He wasn't there. So that was.
Tell us a little bit, you missed that spider trap story where your buddy was killed. But
okay.
What is that and how did that happen?
Well, this whole island had caves and tunnels everywhere, and so these guys could tunnel up, and then they would have maybe a little bush that hadn't been blown off yet. Everything else, all the rest of the plants on that island was blasted away for so much shelling. But they'd have a little rock or a bush that they could raise up, and they could come up under this and they could raise up and shoot you, and you wouldn't even know they were there, and they'd be back down out of sight again, and you wouldn't even know where it came from. And this boy, he had joined our outfit late, and he and I went on Liberty together in Honolulu when we was going over there. And he had a brother that was a Navy pilot, and the Red Cross got us in touch with him, and so we were visiting with him, and he kept telling his brother, "I'm not going to come back. This is my last time. I want to tell you goodbye." And his brother says, "Oh, you'll make it, Bob." And I tried to tell him, "Man alive, you're going to make it back." But he was convinced he wasn't going to make it back. And some guys just had premonitions that they weren't going to make it. So we were up there, they were kind of gathered around up there at this kind of a comm center, communication center. And Captain Austin, our captain, one of the great men of all time, he was sitting there and we were making some plans, what we were doing. And Bob was sitting there besides Captain Austin, and this guy raised up out of a spider trap and shot him and right in the back or the head. I'm not sure just where it was at now, but Captain Austin took him in his arms and held him, and he died immediately. But Captain Austin held him while he was dying, and it's always tough to see people die because they say Marines don't cry, but their eyeballs sweat sometimes, and that kind of thing makes your eyeballs sweat. But anyway, Captain Austin picked him up and carried him over to the AIDS Center and said, "I want to see that this boy gets everything taken care of as much as can be, because I'm going to have to be talking to his folks and writing to his folks and telling him about this." But
Let's see if anybody else has any questions for you, Don. They usually do.
Yeah.
Is Phil here?
Yeah, he's around. Hiding behind the clothes rack there.
He's hiding.
Stay out of the way. Do you have any questions?
Yeah, I've probably got a couple that you kind of indicated that your wound wasn't very severe, certainly not compared to what others were on the island.
no.
Were you when this happened and you were taken off, were you in great pain? Were they able to give you much attention, or were they saving that for the more serious cases?
Oh no, I'm amazed. I didn't feel it when I got hit. In fact, I didn't know it. And when I started to get up, I fell down again. I couldn't stand on it for some reason because it went clear into the bone. But it was a little bit bigger than a large marble. Only jagged edges on it, but a piece of steel. And so they just took me in, and I didn't even know what they did in the aid station. Didn't do anything other than just, I guess, treated it with medicine or something. But got me on the boat, and that's all they do. When you went on the ship, they just had a pair of scissors, and they just cut your pant legs off. And I thought, man, you're cutting my good pair of dungarees up, man. But they just cut it off and put some disinfectant on it, I guess, and bandaged me up, and that was about all I remember. And it was in there until 1950, and it started working out, and got up. And so when I'd sit down and start to pull my knees up or anything, it would push way up and raise up above my skin about. It would push the skin up about so far, and it would hurt like crazy when you do that, especially if you touched it. And it was right here on the top here in my leg, so it's easy to touch them. You get little. So it got to bother me, and I went in and Veterans Administration. They took it out in 1950. So that was kind of the end.
And after you got off the ship and you kind of went back to your unit, AWOL, did your leg affect you in any way when you were trying to move about and do your duties there?
Oh, just no more than a stiff leg would be. Kind of just stiff-legged it around there's all, but it didn't bother me. I mean, I wasn't able to do any running or anything like that or jogging, but just getting around from for a week, it was probably kind of stiff. After that, before I left the island, I was pretty much back to normal.
But you were in a more stationary type thing. You weren't having to go out and climb and...
No, I
do
wasn't.
combat.
No, that's where he stuck me then. And I didn't have to go out and repair telephone lines and stuff like that, where you may have to do some running and dodging and whatnot, because you wanted to kind of dodge and run as you went out, because you're a harder target to hit that way.
When you were back there, with all the caves and all the bunkers and things the Japanese had set up, were you constantly under the threat of attack, or were there times when the threat was kind of subsided?
Well, there was lulls, of course, but you never knew when somebody was going to whack at you. And there were caves, whatnot, in Mount Suribachi that they could get down to where we were at. But and the spider traps and things like that. And then when we had artillery shellings, we had a lot of those. And I'd done enough forward observing to know that when you're bringing the artillery, our own artillery, down close enough to you that you can kill the enemy directly in front of you. When you can hear that artillery shell whistling, that's good news, because if it doesn't whistle, it won't be whistling. I mean, it hits you probably, so you won't hear it. But when it goes over the top of you, you can hear that whistling, that scream. And that blast when the shell goes off I've never heard anything like it. Even a charge of dynamite doesn't sound the same as that. It's just a whoomph, and it shakes everything. And the smell of the place was terrible. You could smell death everywhere, and it was sulfur smell and gunpowder. These are the things you smelled. And that smell is a lasting thing.
I have one other question, and it's kind of timely now in the sense that have you seen either of the Clint Eastwood movies about Iwo Jima, Flags of Our Fathers, or the new one, which is the Japanese Letters from Iwo Jima, just came out? But
I haven't seen the new one. I saw the other one. They had a special showing for us down there. Us guys were at Iwo Jima down there before it went in the theaters, just a couple days before. And it was pretty true to form. I was a little bit disappointed in the fact they spent so much time on Ira Hayes, the Indian fella that was, and made him out, you'd think he was nothing more than just a drunkard, but the guy was a real hero. He'd come all the way up to the Pacific Islands. He was a paratrooper. The guy he had done some great things, some real heroic things. And I felt like they missed the point there with that a lot. And you'd think he was nothing much more than a drunken bum. Here he was, a great American hero. And that was my disappointment with that. I thought that was realistic otherwise, what they had done as far as for the island. I thought they spent so much time on the Bond tour that it didn't be able to bring out some of the stories they could really have had of some real heroic things that were done.
I think part of it was the fact that it was taken from a book that focused not just on the island, but focused on the aftermath of the war. And so I think.
Oh, yeah,
part,
right.
Yeah, that was part of the original book by Ambrose. So I think that's probably why I understand the Japanese is more of the island combat from the Japanese perspective. It doesn't go into the post-war.
Well, the guy that wrote the book was a fellow named Bradley. His daddy was a corpsman, and he was one of the guys in that picture. And I met Bradley down at the Tattered Cover when he was down there doing a book signing, and I'd met him down there, but I just think that was just my only disappointment about Flags of the Fathers. I anticipated.
One question I had, a couple of little ones. I've heard or in reading about Iwo Jima that you can actually at times hear the Japanese underneath you in the caves.
You could, especially when the guys were up on top of Mount Suribachi with that flag raising thing. That was all honeycombed up in that side there, and they could hear it very well. But certain areas where you were, depending where the tunnels were and whatnot.
Was that an awful eerie and
Everything is eerie about it. Everything was terrifying about it. Nobody that wasn't afraid, wasn't scared. I tell you, there was moments that was very eerie. And you never saw very many Japanese. You know, you didn't see them out in troops walking around. You could see them coming out of a shell when we get to one of those caves, and one of the flamethrower guys would get up there, and that flamethrower was a real instrument of war on that island. And you'd see them coming running out and things like that, but you never saw them much. Other than once in a while, you'd see them moving from one cave entrance to another and things like that. But it was seldom to see them, even to see a Japanese. You were fighting a kind of a hidden enemy there. You saw a lot of dead ones, but not very many live Japanese.
Do you know Joe Weinmeier?
Joe Weinmeier's a good friend of mine, and we know a lot of the same people back in Kansas, and
We interviewed him last year on this show.
yeah, he was a flamethrower guy, and I tell you, Joe had some tough areas there. I do remember of going up farther to the front and saw a group of infantrymen coming down, and the hollow look in their faces from what they had just gone through was just embedded in your mind forever.
have you talked much about the war afterward?
Well, I never did till the last few years, simply because I think you just figured nobody understood, and they weren't interested in hearing a war story, and you just, I think you tried to forget some of it, but so it seems like, it seems kind of like awful vague to me in some respects, kind of surreal, like you're somebody else's story or something. It's hard to realize that was it, that you were there.
But not at the time.
No, and I never really had a lot of reactions later. I there was nights that I woke up and my wife would tell me I was making a lot of noise, but it was more of just refighting the war kind of, and just sketches just here and there once in a while. But I've never had any real problems with that afterward.
Have you gone to reunions?
Yes, I have. We have. I just was one this year in Dallas, and I've gone to, I suppose, 7 or so. But then our outfit was very close. We had a unique outfit with Captain Austin. And when you have a bunch of teenage kids, it's amazing how that they, and like somebody like the Commandant of the Marine Corps said one day, World War II practically was won by teenagers. You had them driving tanks and airplanes and ships and submarines and everything else. A bunch of teenagers. Said it's amazing what you can do with a teenager if you train him and challenge him. And so with teenagers, that's why the Marine Corps is eager to get young men, because we had young guys in there that was 15, 16 years old. Some of them, they lied about their age and got in. So it's.
I just had one question too. Captain Austin, is he still around?
He died a few years ago, but we would go. He was a unique man. He was a graduate of Harvard. Later, after the war, went back and got his doctor's in business in Harvard, but he had his MBA when he was at Ewell. But just a very wealthy man. They'd owned tobacco stuff all over the country, and all over the world they had tobacco interests. He owned a steel company and some other things, and they were a prominent family there in Greenville, Tennessee. And so we would go back to his home, and there in Greenville there, and we'd have reunions just from our outfit sometimes, just mini reunions we call them. But he just influenced all of us. And if you'd see somebody on Evo, somebody out there running around, you'd say, who is that crazy guy out there running around? And there's Captain Austin out there just jogging and dodging around, just checking up on his guys, just seeing where they're at. But just a man that influenced all of us. There's not a guy in our outfit that wouldn't say he didn't change their life.
With all the risks that he took, did he make it through Evo okay?
He made it through. He did. No, he was awarded a Silver Star, and great man. He had great moral and Christian values. And interesting enough, I had always believed in God before I went to the Marine Corps. But after I got in the Marine Corps, a fellow that blows a bugle called the field music. One day he invited me over to a little intelligence shack that he didn't use too often, and these guys were in there singing Christian songs and sharing their testimony of what Christ had done in their life. And this guy, next day, said, what do you think of that? You know, and I'd never been exposed to that in my life. I'd gone to Sunday school and church, but I never really understood why Jesus Christ came. I knew I was a sinner, and I knew God was real, and I knew Jesus really came, but I didn't know how it all related to me. And this guy kind of connected all the dots for me. And that was the major change in my life right then and there. Was I later went into the ministry and was on the staff over here at Calvary Church for a number of years, till just this beginning of this year. And I'm planning to go to, we served as missionaries out in the Orient for a number of years, Indonesia and Malaya and that area. And I'm getting prepared to go to Nicaragua as a missionary now. As soon as I can get my act together with everything, to go down helping and just mentor pastors. They don't have much Bible training, and they're weary, and Nicaragua is a land that has been so beaten down, and so I'm going down and just be a mentor for pastors. I got to learn the language, and I got a lot of stuff going for me here yet that I got to do. But
When were you born, by the way?
1925. I tell people oftentimes when they ask me how old I am, I say, well, I was born in the year of 1900 and none of your business. But I'm not ashamed. God's been good to me. I've had a lot of energy and have been healthy, and with some minor things along in my life, if you can call a heart attack minor. And my wife died in 2003, in December, and Christmas of 2003. And right after she died, 3 months later, I had a stroke. But otherwise, I'm doing pretty well.
You look pretty good.
Thank you.
Don, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Wonderful interview, I think.
You're going to learn another language, or at least some?
I'm going to learn Spanish. Yes, amen. I am.
Goodness.
I'm going to go to school in Costa Rica, the Lord willing. And
That is so admirable. My gosh.